households across the USA, you can find many objects that make our life more convenient. We take it for granted how easily accessible products are in this day and age. The idea of there being anything but is hard to believe. But back in the early 1900s, objects such as this fan, this vacuum, and this car were unaffordable to much of the public. So how did objects once reserved for the wealthy and powerful end up in homes across the nation? Well, it's all due to Henry Ford's assembly line. The assembly line originates not in factories worldwide, not even in Henry Ford's automobile plants, but inside meat processing plants in Chicago and Cincinnati. In these factories, rather than having workers shuffling across the plant, workers stayed in one place while overhead trolleys brought the carcasses from worker to worker. The assembly line itself dictated the speed, preventing workers from slacking off. This minimized time wasted ferrying the carcasses around and maximized productivity. At this time, Henry Ford, owner of the Ford Motor Company, was seeking to increase the production of his cars and cut costs. Currently, one Model T took 12.5 hours to produce, which he found unacceptable. Ford also found the current methods of manufacturing inefficient. He had each department make one part of the car, and then had them bring their parts to a spot on the floor to be assembled. But one department was usually too much for one part, and his employees ended up getting in the way of each other. He believed that if he could save workers 50 steps a day, then he could save miles by the end of the year. Less steps taken means more time spent working, and Ford saw the assembly line as the perfect way to save those steps. Ford began by dividing the production of parts such as the motor into dozens of tasks, each so simple that Ford only had to teach employees a few steps before they could perform their jobs. Then, he divided his Highland Park factories into several departments, each in charge of creating different parts. In the motor department, workers would gather in lines around the conveyor belt to do their tasks, as neighboring conveyors carried related parts to put inside the motor. The 80 men in the motor department could produce 120 motors each hour, and similar speeds were seen in other departments. By 1914, Ford's 13,000 workers could manufacture 300,000 cars in 1 year, more than competitors could do with over 5 times that amount. With the assembly line's invention came mass production, a principle in which manufacturers produced a huge amount of goods and then sold them to consumers at low prices. These products were also made identically to appeal to as many people as possible. Before the assembly line, mass production was infeasible. While the workers Ford hired were skilled, they lacked the manpower to produce so many goods in such a short time. However, thanks to the lack of skill needed on the assembly line, Ford could hire large amounts of workers who could produce large amounts of goods without needing training. Another method Ford used to entice people to work for his company was the 5-day work week. While it seems par for the course nowadays, back then people worked 6 days a week. This meant that Ford's workers had the luxury of another day off, while still getting compensated the same amount as before. While some believed that a shorter work week would lead to low productivity and thus lowered profit, it ended up causing the opposite. Workers who had an extra day to recharge would come back to work more well rested and therefore more productive. The benefits would also attract many workers who needed the free time to maintain their work-life balance. A lot of the revenue Ford's workers were earning would be funneled right back into the company as well. Their increased pay would give them the money to buy Ford's automobiles, while their increased free time would give them time to make use of them. Mass production had its downsides, though. Doing such simple tasks for hours at a time in a confined space with no one to talk to had its mental toll. Turnover rates were high, and hundreds of employees were leaving the company. Workers were forced to rush to keep pace with the assembly line. One Ford plant worker reported that the machine I'm on goes at such a terrific speed that I can't help stepping on it in order to keep up with the machine. It's my boss. Even if a problem arose during assembly, the car would have to be shipped out anyways. Ford had to take extreme measures to attract workers to his factories. He doubled his wages from the standard $2.33 per 9-hour workday to $5 per 8-hour workday, which was such outrageous pay that many workers came to Ford just because of it. However, this pay raise was reserved exclusively for those who met his company's standards for clean living, which meant that if workers didn't have clean homes or educated children, they would not receive the pay increase. This was seen by many as another method Ford used to exert control over them. As new branches of Ford opened, the assembly line also found its way outside the United States. For instance, on October 9, 1920, the first Ford car was manufactured on an assembly line all the way in Yokohama, Japan. The branch received car parts from the main department in New York, and then assembled them into fully functional automobiles, which spread both the assembly line and mass production across the globe. Ford's immense success created waves in the manufacturing industry. Competitors such as General Motors knew if they didn't adapt soon, they'd fall behind. General Motors knew they couldn't compete with Ford on quantity, so they decided to offer something Ford lacked in, which was variety. To increase production speed, Ford only offered one automobile, the Model T, and it only came in the color black. In contrast, General Motors offered their cars in many styles and colors, and they released new models each year to keep consumers interested. When customers began flocking to General Motors, Ford knew he had to take drastic action. He closed his factories for most of 1927 and then returned with the Model A, which went 65 miles per hour, came in multiple colors and multiple body styles. Ford had learned to adapt to the market's demand, and soon customers enjoyed a wealth of options from different manufacturers. Despite Ford's efforts, troubles with workers continued. On May 26, 1937, Workers' Union UAW appeared at the Ford plant to hand out leaflets and achieve union representation for workers at Ford's Baton Rouge plant. However, Ford's service department, which notoriously consisted of ex-criminals and police officers, approached them and began assaulting them. Despite the beatings being recorded on video, the police department refused to intervene, saying that the department was simply defending public property. Workers took matters into their own hands and began going on strike. Ford tried to raise their pay to keep them happy, but to no avail, and eventually the company was forced to sign a contract allowing workers to join the union. As time went on, working conditions improved as companies such as General Motors allowed employees to talk with each other while working and to stop the conveyor should there be a problem during assembly. In the 1950s and 1960s, engineers began experimenting with using robots, such as the Stanford arm, to do the busy work Ford's employees once did. And these robots have only gotten more cost-efficient and productive over time. Robots such as Baxter, created by Rethink Robotics, are only costing $3 per hour to operate. And with the recent rise of AI, it's safe to assume factories will only become more efficient at producing the goods that you and I are currently using to clean our homes, cool ourselves down, and drive ourselves from place to place.